Sir, you heard me. Step away from the restricted corridor now!
Officer, I'm not sir to you. I'm a federal judge. You're obstructing my duties.
I don't care who you think you are.
People like you say anything, then do this by the book. Identify yourself, state your legal basis, and call your
This
supervisor.
camera's recording everything.
At exactly 6:12 a.m., in the glass and steel walkway connecting Concourse C to the main terminal at Hartwell International Airport, a simple ID check that should have taken only 30 seconds turned into a public disaster. It was recorded so clearly and completely that there was no way to twist the story later. The corridor was one of those in-between places people barely remember. It was too bright, too clean, too neutral to feel real. But that morning it was filled with travelers moving on autopilot. Sleepy red-eye passengers with blurry eyes, business commuters holding coffee like it was medicine, a family trying to control kids and backpacks at the same time, airline staff walking quickly with that confident I work here energy. Everything felt normal, so normal that no one paid attention to the quiet man in a charcoal suit, until a uniformed officer stepped directly into his path and forced everyone to notice. What made this incident different wasn't just that it involved a federal judge. It was that the airport had cameras everywhere, overlapping angles, wide shots, close-ups, time-stamped video feeds that could all be lined up into one clear, unforgiving timeline. When the footage later went viral, it didn't spread because it was confusing. It spread because it was clear. It was clear. Clear enough to shock the travelers who saw it in person. Clear enough to start arguments across the country about power and responsibility. Clear enough to prove a truth the internet has learned again and again. When authority clashes with documentation, documentation usually wins. As the situation unfolded, it became obvious how quickly an ordinary moment can turn into a life-changing one. It showed how a routine encounter can shift power in seconds, especially when one person understands the system better than the other. The man at the center of everything was Judge Elijah Carter, and he was not an ordinary 52-year-old. While most people his age tried to blend into crowds, keep their heads down, and move through airports unnoticed, Carter walked with a calm confidence. It was the confidence of someone who worked inside powerful systems instead of being controlled by them. He was a federal judge. That position didn't happen because of luck, and it didn't last because of charm. He earned it through discipline and precision. Early in his career, he worked as a clerk for a judge known for tearing apart weak government cases. Later, he spent years as a prosecutor before becoming a judge himself. That meant he understood both sides of the courtroom like a chessboard. He had written legal opinions that law professors assigned to students because they were clear, organized, and impossible to misunderstand. He wasn't famous in the celebrity world, but in legal circles, his name meant something. It carried weight, the weight of someone who read every word carefully, remembered every detail, and refused to accept shortcuts, especially from people who had the power to use force. Carter wasn't dramatic. He didn't shout to win arguments. He didn't act tough to scare people. His strength was his calm, and what made him especially prepared for what was about to happen in that corridor was something most people don't have. He understood how stories are shaped after an incident. He knew how false narratives can slowly become official versions of events. And more importantly, he knew how to stop that from happening. That morning, Carter was doing something almost boring. He was walking to a secure meeting room inside the airport complex. He had a scheduled briefing connected to an important federal matter. It wasn't a trial yet, but it was serious enough to require security and coordination. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't acting nervous. He wasn't weaving through people like someone late for a flight. He was simply walking with purpose. His carry-on suitcase rolled smoothly behind him. His badge and official credentials were tucked inside his inner jacket pocket. Hands behind your back. Carter didn't swing. He didn't curse. He didn't try to run. Instead, he did something that makes bad policing much harder. He described exactly what was happening. "I am not resisting," he said clearly. "I am requesting a supervisor and the legal basis for detention." This was an important shift. Riggs turned a simple request into a threat. When Carter asked for a supervisor, Riggs treated it as disobedience. When Carter asked for legal reasons, Riggs treated it as defiance. That is a dangerous mindset. It turns rights into attitude. It turns inconvenience into an excuse for force. The footage shows the truth in body language. Riggs's jaw tightened, his shoulders lifted, his movements became sharper and less controlled. This was no longer about safety. It was about winning. Second escalation. Riggs grabbed Carter's wrist and twisted it in what looked like a control hold but felt more like punishment. Carter's face tightened for a second, but he didn't cry out. He kept his posture steady. "You are unlawfully detaining me," Carter said firmly, "and you are using force. I want your name and badge number on record." Riggs responded quickly, almost angrily. "You're not in court," he hissed, as if the law didn't apply in the corridor. Then he shoved Carter sideways toward the wall. If you could see the body camera, it would look close and chaotic, but the security camera showed a wide, clear angle, and that's what made it devastating. You could see Carter's hands open. You could see Riggs start the physical contact. You could see people stepping back in shock. You could see the suitcase slide across the floor like it was trying to escape. A woman stepped backward, her mouth open. A man in a business suit pulled out his phone. Two airline employees froze, unsure whether to step in or pretend they saw nothing. The camera captured Riggs slamming Carter's shoulder first into the wall. It wasn't gentle. It was impact. It was impact. And then Riggs shouted the phrase that often appears when someone tries to rewrite events in real time. Stop resisting, ask yourself this. If you saw an officer push first, twist an arm, and then yell a resisting, would you believe the written report or the video? Third escalation. Carter's voice stayed steady, but now it carried real authority. Not dramatic, but official. "I am Judge Elijah Carter," he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I am ordering you to stop. Call your supervisor now." Riggs laughed. It was short and mocking. That laugh told everyone what this was truly about. "Hey, Judge," Riggs scoffed. "Sure, and I'm the president." Carter didn't respond emotionally. He responded strategically. "Preserve the footage," he said, not just to Riggs, but to the cameras, the witnesses, the phones recording. Preserve everything. Preserve everything. Issue with the care. Request medical if necessary. This is excessive force. At that moment, a second officer entered the scene. Officer Lena Park. She looked younger than Riggs, maybe late 20s or early 30s. She moved differently. Her posture wasn't aggressive. It was alert. She approached with her hands visible, scanning the scene carefully like someone reviewing a report before it's written. Park didn't immediately grab Carter. That alone showed she wasn't convinced by what she was seeing. "Riggs," she said calmly. "What's the situation?" Riggs didn't look at. He kept staring at Carter as if Carter were the enemy. "He's refusing commands," Riggs snapped. Park looked at Carter's open hands and steady posture. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't running. "What commands?" she asked. "To step away," Riggs answered. Park glanced up at the cameras, then at the growing circle of witnesses. She picked up her radio. "Supervisor to Concourse seat connector," she said, her voice firm and urgent. And now, that was the moment everything shifted. Once Park called for a supervisor, Riggs no longer controlled the story alone. Misconduct can survive in private. It struggles in full view. Riggs heard the radio call and reacted immediately. "Don't call anyone," he snapped at Park. A statement no confident, professional officer would say if sure of their actions. Park ignored him. She stepped slightly between Riggs and Carter, not fully separating them, but creating space. "Riggs," she said again more firmly, "back off. Let me see his credentials." Riggs tightened his grip. Carter spoke calmly but directly. "Officer Park," he said, reading her name tag. "Thank you. My credentials are in my inner jacket pocket. I will not reach for them unless instructed." "I am requesting a supervisor and documenting excessive force." Park gave a small professional nod. "Understood," she said. Then she looked at Riggs. Release his wrist. Now, Riggs hesitated. That hesitation mattered. In that second, you could almost see the calculation in his mind. If he let go, he would admit he escalated too quickly. If he refused, he would escalate even further, this time in front of more witnesses and more cameras. He chose escalation. Fourth escalation. Riggs shoved Carter again, harder this time, trying to physically force him to turn and comply. Carter's shoulder slammed into the wall once more. The crowd reacted out loud. You could hear gasps. A Tsaya agent in the distance suddenly started moving quickly toward the scene. Officer Park's expression shifted. It became tight and focused, like she had reached a breaking point. "That's enough," she said louder now. Riggs, let him go. Oh, he's resisting, Riggs shot back. Park answered with a sentence that should follow any officer who tries to twist a story. He's not resisting. I'm watching him. She placed her hand firmly on Riggs's forearm, not aggressively, but clearly interrupting his grip. Riggs jerked his arm away like he couldn't stand being corrected. Carter used that brief second to steady himself, planting his foot more firmly on the ground. He took a slow, controlled breath. Then he said a line that would later appear under millions of reposted clips. "Oh, good," he said, looking toward the nearest camera dome. "Then you'll finally have to tell the truth. Within minutes." More authority arrived, just not the kind Riggs wanted. A supervisor rushed in, then an airport operations manager, then Sergeant Daniel Voss from airport police, walking with the unmistakable urgency of someone who knew this had just become a legal risk. Also approached carefully, scanning everything. His first move said a lot. He looked up at the camera, then at Riggs, then at Carter's posture. "What's going on?" Voss demanded. Riggs began talking quickly, his voice defensive and rushed. He entered a restricted corridor, refused commands, got combative. Voss cut him off with a raised hand. "Stop. Who will verify?" "Park? Status," Park answered calmly, without drama. "A subject has not attempted to strike, flee, or reach," she said. Hands were visible. Riggs initiated physical contact. That statement landed heavily in the air. Voss turned to Carter. "Sir, are you injured?" Carter gave a small nod. He didn't exaggerate, but he didn't downplay it either. "My shoulder was driven into the wall," he said. "I am Judge Elijah Carter. I have credentials. I am requesting medical evaluation and preservation of all footage, including radio traffic and security feeds." Voss blinked once, like his mind had just reset. "A judge?" he repeated. "A federal," Carter confirmed calmly. "And I want this documented." The encounter didn't end with a dramatic arrest. It ended with controlled separation, like a temporary fix on a damaged system. Now, Park physically guided Carter away from the wall and positioned herself between him and Riggs. Voss ordered another officer to escort Riggs away from the scene. Riggs protested loudly. Loudness is often what people use when their confidence starts slipping. "This is bull. He's playing you." Riggs shouted. Voss didn't argue. "Fumet, Riggs," he said sharply, "stand down now." Riggs stood down, but he did it with his chin lifted, eyes burning with anger, chest pushed forward. It showed he still didn't believe the rules applied to him. Carter calmly adjusted his suit jacket, refusing to let the chaos shake his composure. He slowly picked up his carry-on suitcase. Then he turned to Voss and spoke carefully, like someone making a record. "I want your incident number," Carter said. "I want your report. I want the names of every witness you can identify, and I want written confirmation that footage preservation has been ordered." Voss nodded, his voice suddenly cautious. Yes, sir, we'll handle it." The entire encounter lasted 9 minutes, 9 minutes that would change Riggs's career forever. Most people who have a confrontation with police in a busy public place might go home shaken. They might tell friends, maybe write an angry email that never gets answered. But Carter wasn't most people. He understood how systems protect themselves. And he knew that the first report written often becomes the official version of events, unless someone challenges it immediately. So Carter acted fast. He went to a medical station and made sure his injury was documented. He requested that his own written statement be added to the incident file. He demanded the name of the supervising officer on duty. Within hours, he filed a formal complaint, but it wasn't emotional. It read like a legal brief. It included timestamps, exact locations, camera identification numbers, policies that may have been violated, a clear demand to preserve all evidence. It made one thing obvious. He expected resistance. His complaint didn't say, "I didn't like how I was treated." It said, "Here are the violations, here is the evidence, here is what will happen if any of it disappears." It was detailed, professional, and devastating. Airport Police Internal Affairs received Carter's complaint before noon. By the next morning, Riggs was placed on administrative leave while the investigation began. That speed was unusual. Most internal investigations take weeks just to begin moving, but ignoring this complaint would have looked like a cover-up. And the person making the allegation wasn't just any citizen. He was a federal judge. If his claims were proven true, the consequences could reach beyond one officer into federal oversight and serious civil liability. Behind the scenes, the investigation moved carefully but steadily, like a tightening rope. A civilian oversight investigator named Marisol Keene, contracted through the city's accountability office, began by pulling the security footage. She didn't start with the body camera. Body cameras can be blocked, angled poorly, or conveniently fail. She started with the wide corridor cameras. She watched the footage once, then again. Then she synced timestamps from multiple camera angles and matched them with the radio logs Park had initiated. Then she watched it again. The pattern was clear. Riggs initiated physical contact first. Riggs escalated without clearly stating a legal reason. Riggs used force on a non-threatening subject with open, visible hands. Riggs shouted, "A resisting!" after he created the physical struggle. Riggs tried to stop another officer from calling a supervisor. Riggs ignored several chances to de-escalate. The initial findings confirmed 3 major violations: failure to use de-escalation techniques, excessive force inconsistent with the level of threat, improper detention without clear legal justification. But something else made the situation even more serious. On one camera angle, right before the first shove, Riggs's lips moved. His face tightened, like he muttered something under his breath. The audio didn't fully capture it, but later witness statements matched what they thought they heard. 2 witnesses reported hearing him say something like, "You people always got a story." That phrase wasn't just rude. It suggested bias. It suggested Riggs wasn't reacting to behavior. He was reacting to a category in his head. Investigators also reviewed Riggs's history, not to attack him personally, but to see if this was an isolated event. Complaints appeared. Some small, some more serious. A pattern showed up: quick escalation, attitude problems, treating questions like disobedience. Most of those earlier complaints had resulted in nothing more than counseling. That's often how systems protect themselves. Early warnings are treated like background noise until something explodes publicly. Now it had exploded. The investigation concluded in just 18 days, shockingly fast for a use of force case involving multiple agencies. Most take months, but the evidence was clear. Carter's complaint was precise. The cameras showed everything. There wasn't much left to argue about. Everything was documented. Everything was recorded. Everything was undeniable. The department released a public statement that tried to sound neutral and balanced, but the conclusions were direct and unmistakable. Officer Riggs violated use of force policy, failed to follow credential verification procedures, failed to de-escalate, and engaged in conduct unbecoming. The recommendation was termination. Riggs resigned 2 days before the termination hearing, likely advised that resignation would look better on paper than being fired for misconduct. His 8-year career ended because of 9 minutes in a corridor. Then came the fight over footage. The airport initially resisted releasing the security video publicly, citing ongoing investigation and security sensitivity. Carter's legal team, because yes, he assembled one quickly, even as a judge, filed a request for release under public records rules where applicable, and demanded that any refusal be justified in writing. The pressure mounted, and eventually the footage reached the internet through authorized release channels, edited to protect sensitive details but clear enough to show the sequence. When the video hit, it exploded. News outlets clipped it. Social media reposted it millions of times. Legal commentators broke it down frame by frame. Use of force trainers analyzed body positioning and escalation decisions. Civil rights advocates highlighted the resisting narrative tactic. And law schools, especially those focused on constitutional law and criminal procedure, used it as an example of why rights mean little without enforcement and why documentation changes outcomes. Public reaction fractured along familiar lines. Some people praised Carter for staying calm, for speaking precisely, for refusing to become emotional bait. Others criticized him for not simply complying, for making it harder, for risking his life over pride. Some argued that the officer was under stress and had to act fast. Others refuted that stress is not a license to shove a compliant person into a wall. But here's what nobody could deny. Not honestly, not after watching the synced camera angles. Carter was right about what happened. The footage showed it. The systemic implications followed because when an institution gets caught in 4K, it often tries to repair the leak before more water pours in. The airport police department announced policy updates, credential verification procedures, mandatory supervisor calls for restricted area disputes, BEVD, enhanced de-escalation training, and a requirement that any force used in credential incidents be reviewed within 24 hours by a command-level officer. They also implemented a body cam policy reinforcement specific to airports where cameras are already everywhere. Officers were reminded that security footage will be cross-checked and narrative inconsistencies will trigger immediate review. In plain language, they made their personnel take training that Carter could have taught because Carter had just taught it to the world the hard way. And after the video went viral, other people came forward, not all with the same story, but with familiar themes. Riggs got loud fast. Riggs took questions personally. Riggs treated travelers like suspects by default. A bartender at an airport restaurant said they'd seen Riggs go off on passengers before. A gate agent recalled Riggs humiliating a traveler who didn't speak English well. A maintenance worker claimed Riggs routinely cut corners on procedure and dared anyone to challenge him. Was every claim verifiable? No. Viral moments attract noise, but the existence of multiple similar accounts raised a question that institutions hate. Was this officer a bad apple, or was he a predictable product of a culture that tolerated escalation until it became impossible to ignore? Where are they now? Judge Carter in this fictional account continued his work on the bench, but he didn't pretend the incident was just a misunderstanding. He used it not as a personal vendetta, but as a public lesson. He spoke at a judicial conference about the importance of documentation and the danger of narratives that override reality. He quietly pushed for better oversight mechanisms for police operating in high surveillance environments where the public assumes cameras automatically create accountability, because cameras don't create accountability unless someone has the power, knowledge, and stamina to demand it. Carter also funded a scholarship for law students interested in civil rights litigation, framed not as anti-police, but as pro-accountability, pro-rule of law, pro-truth. Riggs, meanwhile, disappeared from the badge world. He wasn't in law enforcement anymore. He took a job in private security for a short period, according to later reports, and then left that too. People who knew him said he blamed everyone but himself, blamed the cameras, blamed politics, blamed the judge for ruining his life, but the cameras didn't ruin his life. His choices did. The footage simply refused to lie for him. Here's a question for you. If you were in Carter's situation, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have stayed calm, demanded a supervisor, narrated the facts for the record? Or would you have complied silently just to survive the moment? Comment below, because this is where the story stops being about one corridor and starts being about all of us. Let's talk about the bigger picture. This story isn't just about Judge Carter and Officer Riggs. It's about power and how quickly it can become personal when challenged. It's about race and how identity can shape the assumptions people project onto you before you speak a word. It's about institutions and how they often protect themselves by protecting the people who represent them until evidence makes that protection too expensive. And it's about knowledge, because most people don't know their rights in detail. And some authority figures count on that ignorance. They count on people being too tired, too scared, too intimidated to ask, "What's your legal basis?" What's your legal basis? They count on people not knowing the difference between a lawful order and an unlawful demand. They count on the fact that most citizens don't understand how to preserve evidence or how to force an institution to take a complaint seriously. But when you encounter someone like Carter, someone who knows exactly what authority can and cannot do, someone who can speak in calm, precise sentences that become legal landmines in a report, the power dynamic shifts. The badge doesn't automatically win. The uniform doesn't automatically command submission. Knowledge becomes the equalizer. And in a world saturated with cameras, knowledge plus documentation becomes something even stronger. A shield that can turn your word against mine into your word against the footage. Now, let's address something that some people brought up when this story went viral. Commenters said Carter was arrogant. They said he should have just complied and handled it later. They argued that challenging an officer in the moment is dangerous, and they're not wrong about the danger. There is a reality that exercising your rights can escalate risk, especially when the authority figure in front of you is emotionally compromised. Carter knew that risk. You can see it in his posture. Hands open, voice controlled, movements minimal. He calculated it. He didn't taunt. I'm front. He didn't insult. He didn't reach suddenly. He tried to do the safest version of resistance possible. Procedural resistance, verbal documentation, insistence on supervision. The rebuttal to just comply is visible on the footage itself. Carter wasn't refusing to comply with law. He was refusing to comply with the narrative. And if the safest path is always to surrender your rights in the moment, then the system has effectively trained the public to accept unlawful behavior as the price of safety. That's not how rights are supposed to work. Yes, the risks are real. The risks are real. Yes, the consequences can be severe, but the fact that calmly requesting a supervisor can trigger aggression tells you everything you need to know about the problem. It means some authority figures view oversight as an enemy, not a safeguard. And that's how abuses survive. So what should people take away from Carter's story? First, keep your body language non-threatening even if you're right. Open hands, slow movements, calm voice. Those details matter because they protect you and they protect the record. Second, narrate facts, not emotions. I am not resisting. I am requesting a supervisor. I do not consent to a search. I am complying under protest. Those phrases create a clean timeline that cameras and witnesses can anchor to. Third, ask for identification and legal basis. You don't need to be a lawyer to ask, am I being detained? For what reason? Fourth, understand the power of witnesses. When people are watching, bad behavior becomes riskier for the person committing it. Fifth, preserve evidence immediately. Medical documentation, incident numbers, names of supervisors, written confirmation of footage preservation. Those actions can mean the difference between accountability and a quiet burial. Sixth, follow through. Systems often bet that you'll get tired. Carter didn't. He made it impossible for them to wait him out. And finally, the lesson that ties it all together. One person, one encounter, 9 minutes, and an entire career ended because the truth was recorded and someone had the knowledge to force it into daylight. That's the power of composure. That's the importance of oversight. That's what happens when you refuse to let a false narrative become the official story. Final question for you. What's one thing you learned from this story that you didn't know before? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Stories where rights, power, and accountability collide in real time. This story matters because it's not just about a judge and an officer. It's about every traveler who's ever been treated like a suspect for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's about every person who's been told that asking questions is attitude. It's about every institution that only moves when it's forced. It's about the systemic habit of excusing escalation as stress. And it's about the quiet, stubborn truth that documentation can protect you when nothing else will evolve. Judge Carter's story shows that you can stay calm. You can insist on procedure. You can demand oversight. And sometimes you can win. Not every story ends this way. Not every incident results in accountability. Not every complaint leads to change. But this one did, and that matters. That's Carter's legacy here. Not just the immediate outcome, but showing millions of people that the truth can survive power when it's recorded and pursued. This is the story of how a cop assaulted a black federal judge at an airport and how security camera footage exposed him. But more than that, it's a story about what happens when authority forgets it serves the law and the law refuses to forget.